So do you want to be in an amazing relationship, full of love and laughter, great friendship, great sex, good connections? Do you want to create a safe place for your kids to grow up? Do you want to be that older couple that, you know, their children want to be like them, their grandkids want to be connected to them? Is that something that you want? Because I know for me, when I got married, that was my dream, that was my aspiration. It was something that was really important to me. And yet I remember about 3 months after our marriage having this massive fight with my wife about something that seemed completely ridiculous, and thinking, what the heck happened? How did I get into that space? And so what happened is, over the next few years, my wife and I tried really hard on a variety of different strategies to try and make things better. You know, we were raising children, and no matter what we tried, nothing really seemed to work. And so what that led to is what is still the worst moment in my life, of sitting down my two daughters at the kitchen table with my wife and explaining to them that Mummy and Daddy couldn't live together in the same house anymore, and watching that shock and sadness and confusion in their face as they tried to absorb that, and waking up in my house alone without my children, not being able to put them to bed, not having them there, missing birthday parties, Christmases alone, and all of the costs that go with that. And so I spent a couple of years after my first marriage ended really struggling and trying to find out, you know, what was it that went wrong in our relationship? What was it that was causing the problems that broke our connection and took us apart? And in the process of that study, I came across a guy by the name of John Gottman. And John Gottman is a marriage researcher, and his claim to fame is that he is able to watch a couple talk for 15 minutes about a difficult issue and then predict with over 90% accuracy whether they will divorce in the next 5 years or not. Now, apparently, when his research came out, people stopped inviting him for dinner, so it was really bad for his social life, apparently, but it was really useful for us as therapists because it gave us the ability to identify with a lot of accuracy what were the particular issues that caused problems in the relationship. So Gottman has an interesting story himself. So apparently in the late 70s, Gottman's relationship was in trouble. And so he was talking with a buddy of his at the University of Washington, and who worked in the psychology department. And Gottman, I believe, was attached to the department, but his background is actually mathematics. So he's a Yale-educated mathematician. And so what they were discussing about the problems they were having in relationship. And they decided, well, let's set up some experiments to find out what is it that people who have great relationships do that's different from people who have terrible relationships. And so what they did was they set up an apartment at the University of Washington, and they wired it for sound and video and all of that kind of stuff. And it was like the original Big Brother. And they invited couples to come and stay at the apartment. They called it the Love Lab for the weekend, and they didn't do any intervention. They just filmed them and just said, look, just do what you would normally do on a weekend. Forget that the cameras are there, and then they basically sent them on their way. And then they followed up 5 or 6 years later to find out what had actually happened with these couples, which couples were still together, which couples had separated, and then they went back with the benefit of knowing which couples were successful, and ran a whole series of computer analysis in order to determine what were the things that, if you had seen this couple 5 years before, what were the indicators that would let you know whether this was going to be a couple who would be successful, or whether they would be a couple who would separate. And so this was really interesting because it was a completely different approach from what most therapists did at the time, because what most therapists would tend to do is to develop a theory or an idea, in most cases based off their own experience, and then kind of test that out on their clients. And so if you're a person who really kind of hates yelling, then you might develop a theory that says, well, you know, we should get couples to stop yelling because that always feels terrible when we're in a conflict situation. And so then you become the therapist that trains a client to do things other than yelling when they're having a fight. But what Gottman did was he basically went and he said, I don't have a theory. I have no idea how to make this work. But what he found out in the process is that there were 4 specific behaviors that couples who would do, and both of them would do it, the masters and the disasters, but if they counted these 4 negative behaviors, which I call the 4 relationship killers, and compared them with the positive behaviors, you ended up with a mathematical ratio that would help you determine whether the couple was going to divorce or not. So, couples in happy relationship during a difficult conversation have 5 times as many positive behaviors as negative behaviors. So they have a 5-to-1 ratio. Couples in who are going to divorce, who are in a negative relationship, have a 0.8 ratio, which means that there are only 4 positives for every 5 negatives. And so basically what happens is, so Gottman basically developed this idea of like a relationship bank account to explain this, which basically says if you are earning 5 times as much as you spend, you're in a really good position. Whereas if you're spending more than you earn, then obviously you're going to be in trouble. And the same thing happens in relationships. So the other thing that he also found out is that what he calls the masters of relationship, in general, in normal life, when they weren't having difficult conversations, their normal ratio is about 20-to-1. So there are 20 positives for every negative. And this ratio, incidentally, is the same as that we would see for most people in a new relationship, in the honeymoon stage of relationship. And so this is a really key point that you want to take away, that if you want to be in a good relationship, and what we need to be doing is we need to consciously be trying to increase the number of positive interactions in a relationship, and we need to be actively trying to reduce the negative number of interactions. And so what we're going to do as we go through this course is we're going to give you some really practical tools and exercises that are going to help you increase the positive behaviors in the relationship, and also teach you how to reduce some of the negative behaviors. And what Gottman calls the masters of relationship are a very interesting group, because they basically fell into 2 categories. So what he found out was that out of every 100 couples, about 18% of couples, so that's 1/8, went into a relationship, they fell in love, they stayed in love, they had a good relationship, they would never go to couple therapy, they'd be like, why would we need to do this? You just be nice to your partner, and relationships just work for them. And those people are really great, kind of super annoying, because probably if you're watching this, you're not one of those people. And so those people are great, but they don't really need a lot of attention. And what they basically found out was that the masters of relationship, for the most part, tended to come from households where mum and dad stayed together, where there was a fairly stable upbringing, not necessarily a lot of trauma, there was good kind of emotional expression, physical needs were taken care of, so they had what is known as securely attached, so that they were well taken care of, their parents functioned as a really safe base for them, so unconsciously they had a really good internal model about how to be successful in a relationship. Now, that's great, but what about if you didn't grow up with that? If your parents divorced, or if they weren't really a good model about how to be loving and affectionate and connected in relationship, well, what then? And so what he basically found was that there was this other group that's about 16% of couples, and this is a group that I'm particularly interested in. This group basically somehow figured it out. So what happened is they'd get into relationships, they'd go into the honeymoon stage, so they fall in love, that's all great, and then at some point in time they start having problems. But what they do is they figure out how to make it better. Okay, so they go to therapy, they read some books, they get some help, and they improve the relationship until it becomes a safer, connected space, and so they end up looking like the masters of relationship. So they get it, but they work for it. And I call these people the relationship champions, because they don't get it on a platter. They had to learn how to do it. They're very real. They're making mistakes, and they're really a group that I can identify with. There are 2 other groups. The next group is the couples that fall in love, have the honeymoon stage, start to struggle, and they stay together, and everyone wishes they didn't. So they have a terrible relationship, they fight, they bicker, they die about 10 years younger because of the stress and stuff that happens in their relationship. But they're basically a terrible example of, for people about, getting married, because it's just awful kind of being in, close to them, being raised by them. And if that was your experience growing up, then you're going to come into relationships and you're really going to have some challenges because your model is not going to be really great. And unfortunately, there's quite a few of us. And then we have 50% of the population who separate. And so what that says to me, apart from the fact that I'm going to have a job for a long time, what that says to me is that in order to be in a good relationship, we need to understand that in most cases, we're going to need to work for it. So the other piece of good news is that if you want it and you're prepared to do the work for it, having a good relationship is possible for you. And so what we're going to be doing in this course is we're going to be talking about what it takes to be a relationship champion and the 5 characteristics of relationship champions, and we're going to work through them progressively over this course. So the first characteristic of a relationship champion is that they know where to focus their efforts. So I remember when I got into my marriage, I don't really like conflict, I don't really like fighting. And so a lot of my focus was really on trying to avoid kind of difficult emotional discussions because I didn't really know what to do in terms of that. And that focus was entirely wrong. So what we're going to do in the first course is we're going to talk about, so what is it that you need to focus on? Where do you need to focus your efforts in order to make things better? So the second thing that relationship champions do really well is they read their partners accurately. So for instance, if I walk home and I walk into the house and I see my partner, I can tell you in an instant basically what her mood is, and I have learned how to do that. It's kind of like the difference between, yeah, that's fine, honey, and yeah, that's fine. Those are 2 completely different messages, and if you confuse the 2 of them, your life is not going to go well. So that's the second skill, learning how to read your partner and becoming a master at reading their verbal and non-verbal cues and signatures. So the third thing that relationship champions do really well is that they know how to understand and resolve conflict. They know what's basically driving conflict, and they are able to move through conflict in order to get to a better state of connection. Now, this is a really exciting thing because, you know, there's nothing that makes a relationship feel harder or worse than perpetual conflict. And so learning how to get into that space and to learn some skills to unpack that and actually to start a difficult conversation, knowing at the end of it that you're going to be more connected to your partner is a really useful thing because it makes you feel a whole lot more relaxed and stress-free in your relationship. The next thing that they do, the fifth thing that they do, is that they are able to create safety and trust in the relationship. Now this is incredibly important because this is how we learn to maintain the relationship for the long term and to create a sense of safety and security. And this one essentially is kind of like a core pillar. And so we're going to talk about how we maintain that, but also how we repair if there has been a trust breach at some point in time. So those are the 5 things that we're going to be doing over the course of this course. But what we want to do is we want to start off with this really simple exercise we're going to get you to do that you will probably do unconsciously a bunch of the time, and but we're going to teach you how to do it in a way that kind of hacks the brain a bit and makes it more effective and more powerful. And this is a behavior that people in the honeymoon stage do all the time unconsciously, mostly because they're high on honeymoon drugs, and we're going to talk about some of the honeymoon drugs a little bit later. And so what this behavior is appreciation. So people in the honeymoon stage will be saying like, oh God, you know, I love it that you did that, you know, you look so great, or that was so thoughtful, that dinner you cooked tastes so amazing, you're so incredible, you're such an amazing cook. And so like there's multiple appreciations being laid out, and so what happens is it creates a space of safety, of connection in the relationship. It makes us feel good in our body, it makes us feel good emotionally, and it creates an environment of safety and trust. And so often when people come into relationship counseling, they come in with this, you know, they want to tell me all about the problems in the relationship, and I'm basically stopping them because I'm saying, hang on a sec. No one gets into a relationship to fix problems. People get into a relationship because they feel good being with their partner. And so one of the things, if you're in a space now where your relationship is not going really great, this exercise is really going to help you start to turn the tide. And it may feel a little bit difficult or awkward if you're not in the honeymoon stage anymore to do some of these appreciation. But what will happen is when you start to appreciate your partner, not only will they feel better, but appreciations are actually more powerful for the person who's doing it. And so this is something active and proactive you can do that will start filling your relationship bank account and start protecting and strengthening your relationship.